Hello and welcome. So a smaller game for today, 1000 points. My first time against a new opponent, and he brought his Bretonnians. So we decided to do a small game to begin with. This is what I went with in the end. A runesmith just with a rune of stone and a rune of spell breaking and a shield. So he's got a 2-up, 6-up. We've got a Thane BSB with the rune of iron for +1 wound and a rune of stone as well. He's got a great weapon. 20 Longbeards with great weapons. 20 Iron Breakers. I've got the Ancestor rune there on the banner, giving us a one-off leadership test on a single D6, a break test on a single D6. Personal favourite of mine, that one. And 2 Gyrocopters. So, small game, 1000 points. Decided not to go for any war machines. I normally take war machines, although I've played Bretonnians before, and just in my experience, the big blocks of dwarves works better. The Bretonnians are very destructive on the charge. We would be playing with the additional rule of devastating charge added to the knight units. And that obviously gives them an extra attack on the charge. Can be very devastating. But if you've got a lot of ranks, if you can survive that charge, then they're a lot less effective on the second round of combat. Whereas the war machines, it kind of, when you see a big lance of knights, it looks like you could have a very favourable cannonball bounce or get some bolt throwers to pierce through the ranks and ignore their armour. And you think, yeah, I could kill quite a lot of knights before they get to me. But they do have war saves. And all things can go wrong, as you know, with war machines. And I think that just using those gyrocopters to perhaps redirect some charges and be annoying, and have those big blocks of dwarves advancing up the board, I think that's the best way to go. Went in quite strong then, I would say, for a 1000 point list. You know, I don't have my normal dwarf warriors and slayers. I've gone for the elite dwarves here, so we'll see how it goes. Not knowing, of course, what my opponent is going to bring, and sort of going in quite strong, as I usually do. So from left to right there, we've got, I think it's 24 bowmen. Peasant bowmen with the, as you can see, the defensive stakes in front of them there. There's a unit of, another unit of peasants with halberds. Lovely models they are, old school metal men-at-arms, Bretonnian men-at-arms, lovely models, unpainted however, but I can just see that unit looking spectacular when it's finished. Next one was Knight Errants, I believe, with lances, full command, and then one of his main unit there on the right flank, or his left flank, was Knights of the Realm, and I think he had 2 characters in there, the BSB and the Bretonnian Lord. Oh, sorry, 3 characters, and he had a damsel, level 2 damsel on the Law of Life. So we threw down some terrain and started deployment for a battle line scenario, and I rolled a 6 on the Ancestral Grudge. The dwarves had a seething score to settle, which always makes you feel a little bit guilty as a dwarf player. I mean, how many points would you pay to give your whole army hatred? I don't know exactly, but on an average size game, 2000 points, I don't know, you'd pay quite a bit, wouldn't you? Yeah, we came up with a scenario. Perhaps a trade deal had gone bad, and the suit of Gromril armour that the dwarves had fashioned for the Bretonnians hadn't been paid for in full, and the dwarves had come to collect. So it was 1 gyrocopter out on the right flank there. I got my 2 blocks of dwarfs right in the middle on the line, ready to advance forward in the middle of the board, and my other gyrocopter on the left flank here. With no war machines this time, the blocks of dwarfs just moved straight up on turn 1, which was quite refreshing for me. It was a different way of playing. And I was sort of keen to just move forward and see how the Bretonnians would react to that. Kept close together in the middle of the board. My units are pretty strong, and we didn't actually have a lot to fear, apart from his sort of Knights of the Realm unit there with the characters in. I thought if we stay together and we can survive the charge, then hopefully we can get both units of dwarves there stuck into the same combat, and we'd have a much better chance of winning it. One of my gyrocopters moved up on the right flank there, out of sight, ready to come in and try and redirect some charges or just get in the way of some of the buses of knights there. And the other gyrocopter moved up on the left flank, just out of arc of sight of the bowmen, but in hard cover anyway, in case some of them were in the arc of sight. With its toughness 5 and 4-up save, it felt pretty safe over there, and unless they did some serious manoeuvring, would be in position to sort of move side on with that unit and get a very healthy steam gun template over them. Bretonnians turn 1. The archers stayed as they are, as you can imagine, in order to shoot at the dwarves advancing. Men-at-arms advance, knights-errants advance, and the Knights of the Realms moving through the gap in the ruins there. And actually, the Bretonnians may have made the biggest mistake of the game, unknowingly, on turn 1 there, as the Knights-errant sort of moved slightly too far forward, just ahead of the men-at-arms there, as you'll see, giving the option of a long bomb charge from the blocks of dwarves in the middle of the park. I forgot to mention at the beginning that the damsel rolled up the Dwellers Below and the Throne of Vines for the Law of Life. And on the very first turn, he 6-diced the Dwellers Below on the Ironbreakers, and I used my Rune of Spellbreaking straight away. The archers also fired at the Ironbreakers, killing one of them, and that was first blood then to the Bretonnians. Now, on Dwarf turn 2, the dwarves assessed the situation of the advancing knights errant there. I believe it was Longbeards had to roll a 9 on the charge, so they needed a 12 overall, and the Ironbreakers needed a 10. Now, both of those on a single dice roll of 2d6, quite unlikely, but with one needing a 9, the other needing a 10, it's kind of like needing a 9 or a 10 with a reroll, and I kind of just fancied my chances there if I declared a charge of both of them into the Knights Errant. Perhaps one of them would come off. And if neither of them came off, then I'd be advancing up, 3-4 inches. I've only got a 6-inch march anyway, and those knights were already within charge range, so I thought, why not? Let's just go for it. So straight away then, on Dwarf turn 2, the Longbeards roll a double 6 and get straight into those Knights Errant. Now, I think the writing is on the wall there at this point. I thought, well, all those great weapons charging in, with +1 on the charge, they're strength 7, and those Knights Errant are in some serious trouble. One of my gyrocopters, as you can see there on the right-hand side, moved in front of the Knights of the Realm unit just to try and block them in case the Knights Errant were able to hold. The Knights of the Realm wouldn't be able to go into the flank of them so easily. And you can just see at the top left of the picture the other gyrocopter moving into a prime position there to steam gun the archers. And that was exactly what happened, killing a handful of the peasant bowmen. They failed their panic test, obviously being just out of range on the other side, on the other flank there from the general, and they fled right the way. And you can just see them on the right-hand side now as they fled left to right through the whole army. Close to the edge of the board there, to where they may never return, unfortunately. You can also see in the picture Drew's very cool ruler, which I have to just comment on. It's one of those old school ones, which I believe it's 9 inches, is it? And it unfolds into 36 inches or something like that, or perhaps it's 10 inch and unfolds into 40 inch. But really cool, like proper old school ruler, which actually a lot lighter than carrying around the big tape measure that I carry around. So as you can imagine then, the charge of the Longbeards was pretty devastating. I believe 1 or 2 of them may have lost their life to the Knights Errant, but then they just crashed through them. I decided to go for the overrun, and they actually rolled really big on their overrun and ended up towards the Bretonnian board edge over there. And that saw the end of Dwarf turn 2. Bretonnian turn 2 then, the Knights of the Realm and his 3 characters declared a charge initially into the gyrocopter, who elected to flee, and then redirected into the Ironbreakers, setting up the sort of main combat there in the middle of the board between his Knights of the Realm and his characters and my Ironbreakers with my general in the unit. I was fairly confident, however, of being able to survive that charge because he didn't have that many ranks on the unit, and the Ironbreakers would probably remain steadfast even if they did take quite a few casualties on that first round of combat. and that would be his main opportunity to try and break them. But I think there just wasn't as enough knights there to really take out those Ironbreakers. Sure, he's got his characters in that unit, and had I had characters in that unit, apart from my runesmith, he might be able to kill them. But my BSB wasn't there, just the runesmith general, who is in a way more dispensable than the BSB. So even though I was going to take casualties in that first round of combat, I was fairly confident of being able to grind it out. In the magic phase, I believe I managed to dispel the Throne of Eyes. I don't think Drew had enough dice to cast Dwellers. Or no, actually, sorry, he did have enough dice to cast it, but was already in combat with the Ironbreakers, and actually wasn't any other units within his arc of sight, because obviously the Gyrocopter and the Longbeards were all beyond the Ironbreakers anyway, so there weren't any targets for it. No shooting, and so straight on to close combat. And a very good round of combat for the Ironbreakers. I think 3 or 4 of them died from the charge there. The Lord and the Hero didn't roll particularly well on their attacks, and I believe the Ironbreakers lost the combat by only a couple, remained steadfast and stuck in there, and that really was a big result. I think looking back, the Bretonnians, they really need to get those men-at-arms into the combat at the same time to break the steadfast, or obviously get the 2 lances of knights in at the same time to cause enough wounds to break the steadfast. But Ironbreakers are just so tough. Dwarf turn 3 then. The Gyrocopter out of sight there on the left-hand side declared a charge into the side of the Knights of the Realm unit and failed its charge. The Longbeards swiveled round to try and join the fight later. The fight continued in the middle of the board, and now the Ironbreakers really started to gain the upper hand. The Knights obviously losing their strength bonus from their lances. The Ironbreakers losing their hatred bonus as well, but started to get a bit more favourable dice rolls and take down some more of those Knights. And the Knights lost combat and ended up breaking. I should have mentioned before that his general did issue a challenge against my general. My general declined, which is why you can see the runesmith at the back of the unit there. However, this is at the beginning of Bretonnians turn 3. The Ironbreakers have elected to pursue the Knights unit, run them down, cut them down, and actually ended up crashing into the side of the men-at-arms there. And that would be now the final stages of the game, with his main unit destroyed, and the Ironbreakers in the flank of the men-at-arms. It really just was one more close combat phase to end the game. And so it resulted in a turn 3 tabling of the Bretonnians. Now, in terms of the lists, I think I'd gone for a rather strong list, not really been able to anticipate what sort of army I'd be going up against. Drew had brought a rather fluffy list with sort of medium-sized men-at-arms units, which really are, in terms of the rules of the game, are quite weak, unless you can bring sort of a big bus of them to perhaps have lots of rank and act as a sort of anvil in the middle of the board there, where you can get some flank charges with your knights on top of it. In terms of strategy for the Bretonnians, you've really just got to weigh up what's in front of you and think, well, do I want to get into combat early or do I want to get into combat later? The archers are probably looking at the dwarf warriors, especially the heavily armoured ones like the Ironbreakers, and thinking, okay, well, we wound on 5s, they've got armour saves, we're not going to do much with our bows, perhaps the archers could be used in more of a chaff roll, and the lances of knights, you've really got to, perhaps, if you're up against Ironbreakers and Longbeards like that, perhaps you'd even back off for a bit. I think Drew said he was thinking about painting up a trebuchet for the for the battle, and but I'm sure he'll have one next time we meet. But that would be a good way of trying to soften up the dwarves a little bit if his magic's not working out, or perhaps he'll bring another wizard or a higher level wizard next time, and try and take some of those dwarves out to even up the matchup a bit. He also took a Dwarf Lord and a BSB there with, I think, mundane items. They didn't have magic equipment. I think his Lord had a Morning Star, and the model looks really cool, and I totally respect how he's done that. But if you're trying to take apart a big unit of Ironbreakers, you're going to need a bit more punch, or at least a different strategy by getting a flank charge or having lots of ranks to break the steadfast. But still, really enjoyed it. And next time I'll change up the list. I might bring some some Dwarf Warriors instead of the Ironbreakers, and do a bit more of a fluffy list my way. Maybe take some War Machine, change up the strategy a bit, and have a different scenario or something, and come up with some fluff around it and have some more fun in that way rather than going sort of full competitive. But I really like the Bretonnians. They've got some fantastic models, especially a big Lance of Knights all painted up with all of the different colours on each knight, and the men-at-arms models are super cool as well. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Check back in for some more games soon. We should be doing some smaller games as well, as I've got a new army on the go where I want to do some smaller 1,000 points, 1,500 points battles to get some warm-up games in. So stay tuned on D6 Wounds. Speak to you all later. Bye.